Ranger Mike Henderson's body camera footage, Shoshone National Park, Wyoming. Timestamp 2317. A trembling flashlight beam carved out knotty pine trunks from the darkness, their needles black against a near-full moon glimpsing through sparse clouds. Henderson's heavy breaths misted in the cold night air. I've watched this recording dozens of times, and each time a chill runs down my spine. Dispatcher, this is Henderson, Sector Gamma 7. Repeat, I'm hearing strange sounds. A howl, but incredibly low. And tracks. God, I've never seen tracks like these. Henderson's voice, usually confident and calm, now trembled like a taut wire. The camera jolted as he lowered the flashlight to the ground. The wet soil was riddled with prints. Huge. Each at least a foot long, with deep claw indentations that would belong to a grizzly if grizzlies walked on their hind legs and possessed such a bestial, unnatural grace. The tracks were fresh, their edges still sharp. "It's not a bear," Henderson mumbled, his voice swallowed by the wind's roar in the microphone. "And not a wolf. What the hell is it?" He slowly backed away, the flashlight beam dancing, illuminating the dense undergrowth, casting jerky, eerie shadows. The silence was broken by the snap of a dry twig nearby, to his right, about 15 feet away. Henderson spun around sharply, his hand instinctively darting to the holster of his tranquilizer pistol. Standard Ranger issue, utterly useless against what awaited him in the dark. "Who's there? Identify yourself." "This is the National Park Service." His cry sounded desperate and alone. The answer was a low, guttural growl that vibrated the very ground beneath his feet. It didn't come from one place, but from everywhere at once, enveloping him, robbing him of the ability to pinpoint the threat's direction. This was classic pack predator tactics, only these predators were far from ordinary. "Dispatcher, I need backup, urgent, something..." The camera sharply flew upwards, then fell sideways, the lens pointing at the treetops, momentarily catching Henderson's face, distorted with terror, reflected in the moonlight. There was a short, inhuman shriek of horror, cut short by a wet, gurgling sound. Then, the tearing sound of his thick jacket and the dull thud of a body hitting the ground. A blurry, bluish-black silhouette, huge, hunched with glowing red eyes, appeared in the frame for a moment, bent over something. Then, only darkness and the bone-chilling sound of chewing, punctuated by the distinct crunch of breaking bones. The recording ended with a piercing shriek of static. My service pager, old but reliable, like a military-grade knife, vibrated on my nightstand at 3:17 a.m., jolting me from a restless sleep where shadows danced on the walls of my Spartan apartment on the outskirts of Boise, Idaho. A red indicator light blinked insistently, like an alarm on a submarine. Protocol Blackwood activated. Rendezvous at Alpha Base at 5 o'clock. Full combat readiness. No extra words. There never were in our line of work. My name is Caleb Jackson, but to most in our narrow, very narrow circle, I'm Hawk. The nickname stuck due to my sharp eyesight that had saved my life more than once, and because of an old Native American amulet in the shape of a hawk's claw, set in dull silver, which I wear on a leather cord around my neck, a gift from my grandfather. He was one of the founders of the Ranger Special Division, or RSD, back in the late 50s. Back then, after a series of particularly gruesome and inexplicable disappearances in national parks, the government, grudgingly and under pressure from irrefutable yet carefully hidden evidence, was forced to admit, not all legends were merely tourist tales. In the deep forests, desert canyons, and snow-capped peaks of this country, something ancient, predatory, and utterly beyond the scope of zoology textbooks lurked. Something that periodically emerged to hunt. RSD, that's our official, boring signboard. Unofficially, we're called the Night Watch, and the few local cops or feds unfortunate enough to encounter the aftermath of unexplained incidents before our arrival whisper about the cleaners. Our job is twofold, and both parts are equally important. First, to protect the unsuspecting populace from creatures that most believe don't exist. Second, and often harder and dirtier, to conceal their very existence. Panic is a terrible weapon, far more dangerous than fangs and claws, and if the truth were to get out, the scale of the consequences would be catastrophic. So we work in the shadows, reporting directly to a very small circle of individuals in the Department of Homeland Security whose names appear on no official lists. At Alpha Base, disguised as an ecological research and seismic activity monitoring center deep in the Idaho forests, work was already bustling despite the early hour. The air was thick with the ozone from humming electronics, the smell of strong tar-like coffee, and the faint yet ingrained scent of gun oil and antiseptics. Captain Rochelle Rock Aguilar, our commanding officer, stood by the massive tactical display table, her chiseled figure in her ever-present black tactical uniform seemingly carved from obsidian. Her ancestors, according to family legend she rarely shared, fought similar creatures back in the days of the Spanish conquistadors in the Southwest, and that knowledge, passed down through generations, found its application in the RSD. Her pragmatism and iron will had more than once pulled us out of messes that seemed to have no exit. "Hawk, good you're here," she nodded, not taking her eyes off the holographic map of Shoshone National Park, Wyoming, flickering above the table. "A ranger is missing, Mike Henderson, 32 years old, former Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Experienced guy, no panicker. Last comms check, 3 hours ago." Body camera transmitted a fragment, not for the faint of heart. "You've already seen it." Yes, I had seen it, and that sound of breaking bones still echoed in my ears. Next to her, Dexter Glitch Murphy, our tech genius and specialist in everything that hummed, blinked, emitted, or contained ancient runes, was already tinkering with his equipment. His fingers, clad in haptic gloves, fluttered across the keyboard of a secured laptop, while lines of code, spectrograms, and disturbingly complex diagrams flashed across several flexible monitors surrounding him. Glitch could make a broken toaster talk, hack any system, and decipher an ancient clay tablet's inscription with equal, unnerving ease. His lightweight tactical comms exoskeleton, bristling with antennas, transponders, and sensors, made him look like a cyborg spider from a sci-fi movie. Serafina Doc Washington, our field medic and concurrently a specialist in emergency exorcisms, applying protective seals and neutralizing paranormal toxins, methodically checked the contents of her medical pack. Besides the standard first aid kit for gunshot and laceration wounds, it always contained flasks of consecrated water from a special source, bundles of dried sage and juniper, silver scalpels engraved with protective symbols, and vials of highly secret serums. For those cases where conventional medicine is useless, and the patient starts howling at the moon and growing fangs. Preliminary assessment, werewolf activity, gamma class, escalating to Delta, Aguilar continued, her voice even and businesslike, as if discussing routine inventory. Henderson was patrolling Sector Gamma 7 near the old, abandoned Blackwater Ridge Fire Lookout. Locals are already sweeping the perimeter, but, as expected, with no results. Regular search teams are just fodder for these things. Our gear is a separate song, a symphony of death for nocturnal creatures. It combines cutting-edge technology with what many would call medieval superstition, but which in practice has repeatedly proven its lethal effectiveness. My trusty rifle is a modified M4 SBR chambered in 300 blackout, chosen for its unmatched stopping power at short ranges. But the bullets aren't ordinary. Each is hand-cast from 925 sterling silver with a depleted uranium core for better penetration and ballistics. The M203 underbarrel grenade launcher is not loaded with fragmentation rounds, but with special XM1060 silver claw capsules containing concentrated aconite extract, colloidal silver, and a suspension of consecrated salt. This hellish concoction causes severe chemical burns and temporary nervous system paralysis in most lycanthropes and some other cryptid species. Our Guardian 4 body armor has composite ceramic plates capable of withstanding a high-caliber rifle shot, but its inner layer is stitched with the finest silver threads, consecrated in a special ritual that Doc performs before each operation. Tactical helmets are equipped with Argus 3M multispectral visors, capable of detecting not only thermal signatures across a wide range, but also anomalous energy fields, thaumaturgical emanations that surround supernatural entities. Each of us also has personal charms, talismans. I have my grandfather's compass. Its meteor iron needle always points to the true north, even when magnetic fields go haywire or we're in a place where normal navigation fails. Aguilar has a family heirloom knife of Toledo steel with silver inlay, which she claims her ancestor used to dispatch a vampire somewhere near Seville. Glitch has a constantly changing assortment of electronic trinkets, crystals, and ancient amulets that he forces to work in synergy, creating a personal interference field against hostile magic around himself. Doc wears an ancient silver cross around her neck that has saved her life more than once, deflecting blows and curses. An hour later, we were aboard our Nighthawk, a heavily modified UH-60 Black Hawk, painted in matte black, light-absorbing paint, and equipped with radar suppression, thermal signature reduction, and active rotor noise cancellation systems. This allowed us to approach targets virtually unnoticed. The journey from Idaho to Shoshone, Wyoming, about 400 miles direct, took just over an hour and a half. Our bird is capable of a lot when the pilots get the order for maximum speed, minimum altitude. We were met by a small group at a temporary landing pad hastily set up near the park's main ranger office. The county sheriff, a burly man in his 50s with a face etched with wrinkles and chronic anxiety, and a couple of his deputies looked as if they hadn't slept for days and had seen a ghost. Their eyes widened as we disembarked. 4 figures in black, armed with weapons they'd never seen before and would undoubtedly never learn their true purpose. I caught a snippet of their whispers as I passed, grabbing my backpack with extra ammunition. It's them. Those guys. The monster hunters. Federal Special Ops. Rumors, as always, preceded us, growing into the wildest details. Sheriff Brody swallowed nervously, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Glad you're here, Captain Aguilar. We did all we could. Swept the square where Mike disappeared. Found his ATV, it was overturned. And this." He handed Aguilar a secured tablet. The screen displayed several high-resolution photos, the same tracks we'd seen on Henderson's camera recording, only now visible in detail. and something else. Clumps of coarse, bluish-black fur caught on a prickly, wild raspberry bush, and a few drops of dark, almost black, viscous blood on fallen pine needles. "The K-9 unit refused to follow the trail," the sheriff added in a dropped voice. The dogs whimpered and cowered at their feet. "Thank you, Sheriff Brody." Aguilar took the tablet, her gaze cold and analytical. "Do you have a map with Henderson's last known route and markings where these finds were discovered?" One of the young rangers, pale as a sheet with trembling hands, nearly dropped a map of the area as he unfolded it on the hood of his patrol pickup. With a shaky finger, he pointed to a spot. "He was heading towards the old fire lookout on Blackwater Ridge. Said he'd checked the seismic activity sensors. There'd been small but strange tremors recently, not like regular earthquakes." Aguilar nodded. "Understood. We'll take it from here. I recommend you and your men stay at base. Lock your doors and windows, and no solo forays into the forest. This isn't a request, Sheriff. It's an order." Her voice allowed no argument. Sheriff Brody looked at her, then at us, and his eyes flashed with immense relief mixed with primal horror. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you say, ma'am, we'll wait here." His men were already backing towards the office building, casting frightened glances at us. We deployed our mobile command console, a compact but powerful communications and analysis suite, and Glitch immediately connected to our satellites and the network of disguised sensors we'd scattered around the perimeter of the potential operation zone with drones during our approach. "Tracks lead northwest towards the lookout, as anticipated," he reported a few minutes later, checking his readings. "There are faint but persistent residual thaumaturgical energy emanations. Concentration increases as we approach the ridge. Something very bad definitely happened there, and continues to happen." "All right, team." Aguilar snapped the buckle on her tactical belt, checking the securing of her silver sword behind her back. "Check gear. Sync watches moving out in 5 minutes. Blackwood protocol is active, and remember, no hesitation. Shoot to kill. These things take no prisoners, and we can't afford that luxury." I checked my M4, chambered around, feeling the familiar cold of the metal and the slight vibration from the stock's built-in stabilizer. Grandfather's compass on my chest subtly warmed and began to tremble faintly. A bad sign. A very bad one. Ahead lay an ancient forest full of shadows, secrets, and teeth. And we were the only ones who could enter that darkness and try to emerge alive, bringing back the answers, or what remained of those who knew them. The Shoshone forest met us with a silent, palpable hostility. Centuries-old Douglas firs and subalpine firs stood so densely that their thick canopies intertwined overhead, creating perpetual twilight at their roots, even at midday. Sunlight couldn't penetrate here, only occasionally dappling the damp, springy carpet of fallen pine needles. The air was heavy, stagnant, saturated with the smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, resin, and something else. Faint, yet persistent, musky, slightly sweet, like the scent of decay, which made the hairs on my neck stand on end and my instincts scream danger. We moved in a tactical formation, Aguilar in front, her figure taut like a coiled spring, Glitch and I on the flanks, covering sectors, Doc at the rear, her gaze meticulously scanning our back. Our boots with reinforced lugged soles trod silently on the forest floor, but every snapped twig, every rustle echoed deafeningly in the oppressive silence. The multispectral visors on our helmets were down, painting the world in ghostly shades of green, orange, and purple, picking out the thermal signatures of squirrels busily scrambling up branches and a bull elk frozen in the distance before it, sensing something amiss, bolted and vanished silently into the thicket. But these weren't the signatures we were looking for. The tracks we had found earlier and which were recorded on the sheriff's tablet became increasingly clear as we advanced. Huge, deeply pressed into the soft, wet soil, they led us steadily uphill towards the darkening Blackwater Ridge against the sky. These weren't just paw prints. They held a twisted, unsettling humanoid quality, long, almost primate-like fingers, capable of grasping, ending in thick, non-retractable claws 3 to 4 inches long, sharp as razors. I had seen tracks of grizzlies, cougars, wolves, but this was something different. Something that had evolved to tear flesh and break bones with maximum efficiency. And these tracks were fresh, the soil around their edges still undisturbed. There were several running parallel, sometimes intersecting. It was a pack. Strange. Glitch muttered over our secure tactical comms, his voice muffled by the helmet's synthesizer, but I detected a note of concern. Energy readings are rising, Cap, but it's dirty, distorted. Gamma-class lycanthropes usually have a clean primal signature like a burst of pure rage. Here, there's an admixture. I can't quite identify it. It's like static electricity on the verge of a nervous breakdown, as if someone's trying to tune a radio to a frequency between worlds. And there are traces of residual magic, not typical of ordinary werewolves. Someone is influencing them, amplifying them. Focus on the primary threat, Glitch. Aguilar's even voice cut through his thoughts. We'll put anomalies in the report later, if we survive and have anything to report. We need to find Henderson, or what's left of him, and neutralize the source of the threat. By the time we reached the base of the ridge, the sun was already rapidly sinking in the west, painting the sky in ominous blood orange and violet tones. The Blackwater Ridge Fire lookout towered above the treetops, like the rusty skeleton of an ancient giant, a 100-foot metal structure with a small birdhouse-like observation deck at the top. It looked abandoned and sinister, especially in the deepening twilight. The wind, intensified in the open space, howled through its rusted beams, creating an eerie, prolonged melody. "We're going up," Aguilar commanded, carefully examining the lookout through image-intensifying binoculars. Staying on the ground in this forest at night is suicide, especially with those things roaming nearby. The lookout will give us a height advantage, visibility, and a little time to prepare for a confrontation. The ascent up the shaky, creaking metal ladders covered in rust and bird droppings took several agonizing minutes. With each flight, the wind grew stronger and colder, piercing our tactical gear despite its thermal insulation, and howling through the rusted beams, making the entire structure subtly but unpleasantly sway. The observation deck was a small square cabin about 10 by 10 feet, with windows all around the perimeter, many of which were broken or hastily boarded up with old, time-blackened planks. Inside there was a heavy smell of dust, mouse droppings, decay, and desolation. But from here, from a bird's-eye view, there was a panoramic, albeit grim view of the forest stretching below, already almost entirely submerged in thick blue twilight. "Glitch, deploy perimeter defense," Aguilar ordered, scanning the surroundings through powerful night vision and thermal binoculars. "Hawk, Doc, check the approaches, reinforce what you can. I'll handle comms with base and set up the stationary sensors." Glitch immediately set to work, pulling a set of small, hockey puck-like devices from his pack. These were our portable seismic sensors, laser-activated motion detectors, and Mk3 Banshee ultrasonic emitters. He carefully and quickly placed them at the corners of the platform, on the railings, and on some protruding beams below, creating a multi-layered invisible protective perimeter. System active, Cap. Any mouse larger than a rat crossing the established perimeter will trigger an alarm on our wrist displays. The Banshee emitters are tuned to a broadband frequency, extremely unpleasant for most nocturnal predators with acute hearing, especially lycanthropes. For them, it's like a drill to the brain. That'll buy us a few precious seconds. Meanwhile, Doc and I checked the flimsy railings, which we reinforced in places with tactical rope, and the condition of the wooden floor. Everything seemed sturdy enough to support our weight and a small firefight. Aguilar, having finished setting up the more powerful stationary sensors capable of tracking movement up to half a mile away, attempted to contact Alpha Base. Base, this is Rock 1 copy. We are on position Blackwater Ridge, situation tense. Tracks confirm Gamma class, multiple targets, preparing for night operations, over. The reply came with heavy static, the base operator's voice lost in the crackle. Rock 1, base here. Copy that. Weather in your area is deteriorating. Severe thunderstorm front. Air support will be difficult or impossible. Proceed as per situation. Radio silence protocol until further notice, unless situation becomes critical. End transmission. Aguilar turned off her radio. So we're on our own, as usual, and even the weather's against us. She looked at the darkening sky, where heavy storm clouds were already gathering. Night fell quickly, as if someone had abruptly draped the forest in a black, impenetrable shroud. The moon and stars were completely hidden behind a dense veil of clouds, and the only sources of light were the dim beams of our weapon-mounted tactical flashlights, pointed downwards, and the faint greenish glow of Glitch's equipment. The wind intensified to gale force, moaning and howling through the metal structures of the lookout, making it visibly sway and creak in all its rusty joints. Every creak, every rustle below, amplified by our heightened imagination, made us flinch and grip our weapons tighter. We divided observation sectors, silently peering into the darkness where treetops swayed in the gusts of wind, creating an illusion of movement. The hours dragged agonizingly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Around 2 in the morning, when the tension was at its peak, Glitch cursed quietly but distinctly. Cap, movement. Multiple contacts 300 yards southwest sector towards the old creek. Approaching fast, very fast, and they're bypassing our lower seismic sensors. Smart creatures. Our visors immediately picked them out of the darkness. Several bright thermal signatures, moving at incredible speed between the trees like ghosts. They weren't running like ordinary animals, but rather darting low to the ground, using all 4 limbs, yet with an unnatural broken spider-like grace, leaping over fallen logs and streams with an ease no known earthly creature could match. Prepare to engage. Aguilar's voice was steel, devoid of all emotion. Fire at will. Don't let them get to the supports. I pressed my face to the tactical scope of my M4 SBR, my heart pounding in my chest like a snared bird, adrenaline burning in my veins. They burst from behind the trees at the very base of the lookout, and in the light of our powerful weapon-mounted tactical flashlights, their silhouettes looked nightmarish. These were not wolves, but monstrous, grotesque parodies of humans, covered in thick, matted, bluish-black fur that seemed to absorb the light. Their bodies were hunched, shoulders broad and powerful, arms long and muscular, ending in huge black claws capable of tearing steel. Their snouts were elongated like a wolf's, but with shorter jaws lined with rows of yellowish, needle-sharp fangs. But the most terrifying thing was their eyes. They glowed with a hellish, unnatural red fire, full of bestial rage, hunger, and a twisted, malevolent intelligence. There were 4 of them. 4 nightmares from the deepest depths of primal fear. And they climbed. Without hesitation, making no sound except a low, guttural growl, they began to scale the metal supports of the lookout with incredible, monkey-like agility, clinging to beams and crossbars with their gruesome claws. Their claws screeched on the rusted metal, a sound that made my blood run cold and set my teeth on edge. "Fire!" Aguilar roared, and her rifle immediately thundered, spitting short, precise bursts. Our rifles came alive almost simultaneously, filling the night with gunshots and muzzle flashes. Silver bullets struck the nearest creature, which had already reached halfway up. It howled, not like a wolf, but like a human in unbearable, hellish pain. Its body arched, and it plummeted downwards, hitting the ground with a dull, heavy thud. Smoking silver rods protruded from its chest and head. But the other 3 continued to climb, oblivious to the loss of one of their own, their speed only increasing. One of them, particularly large and fast, reached the edge of the platform, and with one powerful leap, cleared the flimsy railing, aiming directly for Doc. I spun at the sound of her quiet yelp, and without aiming, instinctively slammed a short but vicious burst into its chest from a couple of feet away. The creature was thrown backward, its claws desperately scrabbling at the railing trying to hold on. Its face, contorted with rage, was barely 6 inches from mine, hot, foul-smelling drool dripping from its fanged maw, eyes burning with hatred. Without thinking, I pulled the trigger again, and its head exploded into a bloody mess of brains, bone, and black fur. Pieces splattered all over the platform. "Glitch Aconite down!" Aguilar shouted, firing at another creature that was already clambering over the railing from the other side, its claws scraping on the metal grating. Glitch already had a grenade ready. He pulled the pin and hurled it down with force towards the base of the lookout. There was a dull thud, and a cloud of acrid, yellowish smoke quickly enveloped the lower part of the structure. The 2 remaining creatures, already halfway up, howled with pain and rage, their fur smoking where it came into contact with the aconite dust, and they began to thrash, losing their grip. They hesitated for a few crucial seconds, and that was enough. Aguilar and I, having reloaded our magazines, emptied our remaining ammunition into them. The silver did its job. The creatures, riddled with dozens of bullets, tumbled down, joining the first one. "Glitch, activate Banshee at full power directional sector," Aguilar ordered, quickly reloading her rifle and scanning the dark forest below. Glitch tapped several sensory buttons on his wrist computer. A high-frequency, barely audible to human ears, shriek erupted, which, however, made us wince. But judging by how the bodies below twitched and convulsed, for the werewolves it was like a red-hot hammer blow to the exposed brain. After a few seconds, the bodies fell silent. Sector clear. For now, I exhaled, feeling the adrenaline slowly recede, leaving behind a nauseating weakness and trembling in my hands. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, ozone from the Banshee, and a faint but repulsive stench of burnt fur and blood. "Doc, are you okay?" Aguilar asked, her voice tense, but no longer as sharp. "I'm fine, Cap," Serafina replied, her voice slightly strained but firm. She wiped blood and brains from her face from the creature I'd killed. No scratches, but my heart almost jumped out of my chest. Those things, they were fast. We stood on the wind-swept platform, surrounded by the signs of a brutal struggle. Below, in the darkness, under a blanket of aconite smoke, lay 4 motionless bodies. But we knew this was only the beginning. The forest around us still breathed hidden menace, and this silence was deceptive. And the night was far from over. This lookout was our temporary fortress, but it would also have become our mass grave if we had delayed. And I was sure the smartest and most dangerous creatures had yet to show themselves. Glitch's whisper about dirty energy readings and outside influence lingered in my mind. This was not just an attack by a pack of hungry werewolves. There was something else here, something far worse. Dawn crept into Shoshone reluctantly, a gray, chilly light that barely dispelled the night shadows clinging to tree trunks and dark ravines. The wind had died down somewhat, but the air remained cold and damp, saturated with the smell of damp earth, decaying pine needles, and the persistent scent of ozone from our banshees. We spent the rest of the night in tense, exhausting vigil, taking turns on watch, but no more attacks came. Only occasionally from deep within the forest, from the ridge, a mournful, prolonged howl echoed, sending shivers down my spine, and my grandfather's compass on my chest began to tremble restlessly. They were there, and they were waiting. Hawk, Glitch, with me. We're going down to check. Aguilar was as composed and decisive as ever, not a muscle twitching on her face, though I saw dark circles under her eyes and dried blood on her cheekbone, a mark from one of the creature's claws that had grazed her helmet. The sleepless, tense night was taking its toll on all of us. Doc, you stay on overwatch. Rifle ready. If anything goes wrong, let us know with fire, and don't hesitate to use Silver Claw. Understood, Cap. Serafina nodded, her face serious. She took up position near one of the openings, her M4 aimed into the forest. We carefully, trying not to make a sound, descended the creaking, frost-covered metal ladder. The first thing we noticed was the glaring absence of bodies. The 4 werewolves we had put down with such difficulty last night were gone. On the damp, soggy ground from the night's rain, only dark, blurred stains of coagulated blood remained. A few extracted silver bullets deeply embedded in the soil, and distinct, wide furrows, as if very heavy sacks had been hastily dragged across the ground towards the forest, towards the ridge. Glitches. Sensors had recorded a brief burst of activity around 4 a.m. They had returned when we were at the limits of exhaustion, and acted quickly and quietly, avoiding our traps. They took their own, I stated, examining the site of the night's carnage. My voice sounded hoarse. That's bad. Very bad. They're not just wild, crazed beasts. They have organization, discipline, and someone who controls them. Or a very strong and twisted pack instinct, Glitch added, his multispectral visor down, as he meticulously scanned the surrounding area, his sensors quietly chirping. Cap, Hawk, over here. I've got a trace. Not just blood and fur fibers, but residual thaumaturgical emanations. Very faint, almost at the limit of my instrument sensitivity, but they definitely lead from here deeper into the forest. And they're different from what we've detected before. More concentrated, more malevolent. He pointed to a barely visible trail leading into the thicket. If they drag the bodies away, it means they have something to hide. Aguilar mused, rubbing her chin. They don't want us to have samples for study. Either way, we need to know where these tracks lead. It will lead us to Henderson, or to their lair. The bloody trail, mixed with drag marks, was barely visible on the carpet of fallen pine needles and last year's leaves. But to an experienced tracker like Aguilar, and with the help of Glitch's high-tech sensors, it was as obvious as a highway. It led us deeper and deeper into the forest in the direction from which the night attacks had come, to the base of Blackwater Ridge. We moved along it, observing all precautions. Aguilar in front, her movements fluid and cat-like, I covering her right flank, my finger on the trigger. Glitch on the left, his portable anomaly detector and ground-penetrating radar quietly chirping, scanning the soil and the surrounding area. The trail meandered for about half a mile, becoming increasingly distinct until it led us to a massive wall of rocky outcrop, densely overgrown with wild ivy, thorny bushes, and ancient mosses. If not for the persistent readings of Glitch's device, which began to emit accelerating signals, and a few barely visible drops of dark, congealed blood on the gray, lichen-covered stones, we would surely have walked past, missing the narrow, almost completely hidden by a thick curtain of ivy and deep shadow, maw of a cave. The entrance was no more than 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, and from it emanated dampness and cold. "Looks like this is it," Aguilar whispered, her hand instinctively resting on the grip of her trusty .45 caliber pistol with a magazine loaded with expansive silver bullets with tungsten cores, holstered at her hip. It was her last resort weapon. "Glitch, what's inside? Can you scan?" Glitch froze for a few seconds, his gaze fixed on the readings of his wrist display, which he had connected to his portable ground-penetrating radar. Temperature inside is significantly lower than outside, which is logical for a cave of this depth. High humidity, almost 100%. And yes, there are definitely multiple biosignatures. Several. Faint, intermittent, but alive. Pulse is very slow. Body temperature is lowered. It's a state of suspended animation or deep hibernation. And the background, the thaumaturgical background here, is much stronger than outside. We're on the threshold of something very old, very powerful, and very evil. I wouldn't advise poking our noses in there without extreme necessity, Cap. We have extreme necessity, Glitch. Aguilar resolutely pushed back a strand of hair that had escaped from under her helmet. Henderson is in there, and if this is their lair, we have to clear it out. Get ready. One by one, I'm first. We entered, activating the powerful tactical flashlights mounted on our rifles, their bright beams cutting through the thick darkness of the cave. The air inside was stale, heavy, pressing down on our lungs, smelling of dampness, mold, decay, and something else, sickeningly sweet, cloying, like the smell of rotten meat, mixed with the acrid scent of ammonia. The narrow, winding passage widened sharply after a few yards, opening into a small but tall chamber, its vaults lost somewhere in the darkness above our heads. And what we saw in the intersecting beams of our flashlights made even me, an RSD veteran who had seen my share of horrors, swallow the rising nausea and feel an icy chill run down my spine. From the low, uneven, condensation-dripping ceiling of the cave hung several elongated, giant, repulsive insect larvae-like cocoons. They were crudely but strongly woven from thick branches, intertwined with mud, clumps of dark fur, scraps of clothing, and some sticky, glistening, translucent threads like a giant spider's web. The cocoons, there were at least 5 or 6 of them, subtly trembled, and from within came quiet, intermittent, almost inaudible breathing and a faint, barely perceptible heartbeat, which our sensors picked up. One of the cocoons, the largest, hung lower than the others, almost touching the ground. Aguilar carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements, approached it, and with the tip of her Damascus steel combat knife with a silver edge, neatly cut through the dense, leathery shell. From the cut immediately gushed a murky, brownish, foul-smelling liquid, and in the opening, a human face appeared. Distorted beyond recognition, bloated, covered in liver mortis stains, and already starting to sprout coarse, bristly fur through the skin, but still vaguely recognizable. "Henderson," Aguilar breathed, her voice devoid of all emotion, but I saw the muscles clench in her jaw. The missing ranger was alive, or rather his body still showed signs of life, but his eyes were closed, eyelids twitching, chest barely noticeably, convulsively rising. His hands, pressed to his body and tangled in sticky threads, were already irreversibly deformed, fingers lengthening, joints twisting at unnatural angles, nails turning into thick yellowish claws. The process of monstrous transformation was in full swing. He was not yet a werewolf, but no longer human. 2 more cocoons hung nearby. When we opened them with the same caution, they revealed a man and a woman in their 30s, judging by the remains of their tourist clothing, bright jackets and trekking boots. They too were alive, or rather their bodies were still functioning, but their transformations had progressed even further. Their features were barely discernible under a layer of thick, sprouting dark fur and bone growths forming bestial muzzles. Their breathing was hoarse and intermittent, saliva dripping from their half-open mouths. God Almighty. Glitch whispered, stepping back and covering his mouth with his hand. His usually imperturbable face contorted in a grimace of disgust and horror. They're growing them, incubating them, like in some monstrous hive? Captain Aguilar silently, with an impassive expression, looked at Henderson. In her eyes there was no pity, no horror, only cold, steel, ruthless determination. She slowly, without taking her eyes off the ranger's deforming face, took out 3 disposable syringes with thick needles, filled with a clear, slightly oily liquid, from a special pouch on her belt. This was lycanthropy neutralizer LX7, the latest development from our labs. It terminated the transformation process at the cellular and genetic level, irreversibly and fatally. Cap. I began, my voice trembling, but I faltered under her heavy, icy gaze. There's no chance, Hawk. Her voice was quiet, but firm as granite. Protocol 7, Charlie, is categorical. Transformation after 12 hours, especially with this method of incubation, is irreversible. We've tried to save them before in earlier stages. It always ended in a bloodbath and the loss of our people. What's growing inside them can no longer be stopped. This is the only way. Mercy. A quick death is better than turning into that. She nodded towards the cocoons. She approached Henderson's cocoon and decisively, without hesitation, injected the needle into his carotid artery. The ranger's body jerked violently. A strangled gasp escaped his throat. Then he went limp. His breathing ceased. The same fate befell the 2 tourists a few seconds later. A heavy, oppressive, palpable silence settled in the cave, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water from the limestone vaults of the ceiling. I felt an icy knot tighten in my heart. We had come to rescue, but we became executioners. But Aguilar was right. This was war, and in war, one had to make monstrous, inhumane decisions to prevent even greater evil. I forced myself to remember their faces. It was the least I could do. Suddenly, the anomaly detector on Glitch's wrist emitted a piercing, alarming shriek. Cap. Movement. Multiple contacts from deeper in the cave, and they're very fast. Approaching. Before we could turn and prepare for battle, a new wave of werewolves burst from a dark, narrow passage at the far end of the chamber with furious, multi-voiced howls. There were at least 5 of them, moving at incredible speed, their red eyes malevolently gleaming in the gloom, saliva dripping from their bared fangs. "To arms!" Aguilar roared, her pistol already in hand. The cave instantly filled with the thunder of gunfire, muzzle flashes from our rifles, and the furious, chilling roars of the attackers. Silver bullets found their targets, tearing chunks of flesh and fur from the bodies of the attacking creatures. One of them, which had leaped at me, crashed at my feet, choking on its own dark blood, its claws scraping my boot. Another, attempting to flank us and pounce on Glitch, received a double blast from his tactical shotgun, loaded with silver buckshot, and was thrown back against the wall, leaving a bloody streak. The battle was short but incredibly fierce and brutal. We put down 3 of the attackers, but the 2 remaining ones, having sustained several wounds, unexpectedly turned and howled as they rushed back into the same dark passage from which they had just appeared. "They're retreating!" I shouted, quickly reloading my empty rifle magazine. Strange. Usually they fight to the last until they're on their feet, or until we put them down. Glitch again stared at his detector, his face concentrated. A trap, Cap, the energy readings in there, deeper in, are off the charts. It's pulsating. That's the epicenter of this whole nightmare, the heart of darkness. Aguilar looked at the dark, gaping passage, then at us. In her eyes, usually cold and calculating, a dangerous, predatory glint appeared for a moment. Then that's exactly where we need to go. If that's their lair, their heart, we must rip it out. They're protecting something important. Someone, let's go. And be ready for anything. This will be our last fight. We moved forward into the unknown, into the maw of the beast, leaving behind the grim chamber with empty cocoons and the bodies of those we couldn't save, but whose agonizing transformation we had interrupted. The air grew colder and denser, and the repulsive smell of decay, blood, and something else, ancient, primal, and unspeakably foul, intensified with every step. I felt my grandfather's old compass on my chest begin to vibrate more and more strongly, its needle flailing wildly as if insane, unable to find direction in this cursed place. We were approaching the very heart of darkness. The narrow, winding passage, which we followed with utmost caution after the retreating werewolves, illuminating the way with powerful tactical flashlight beams, suddenly widened and led us into a huge, spacious grotto that was astonishing in its size. Its uneven, encrusted vaults were lost somewhere high in the darkness, 50 feet above our heads, and sparse, dim rays of light, inexplicably breaking through cracks in the rock overhead, created ghostly, trembling dust columns in the still, heavy air. The cave walls were covered with wet, glistening calcite and aragonite formations, resembling frozen waterfalls or the ribs of a giant, long-dead creature. In the absolute silence, broken only by the echo of our own footsteps and the distant, monotonous drip of water, there was something sinister and oppressive. In the very center of this gigantic, underground cathedral-like chamber, on a small natural elevation of black, time-polished stone, stood a statue. It depicted a monstrous anthropomorphic wolf, standing on powerful hind legs, no less than 15 feet tall. Its enormous maw was predatorily bared, revealing rows of long, dagger-sharp fangs, and from its massive fur-covered, or stone imitation thereof, head grew thick, branched antlers, like those of an old stag. The idol's eye sockets were empty, but they seemed to follow our every move, emitting an invisible but palpable wave of primal horror and malevolence. At the base of the statue, on an improvised altar, lay time-blackened bones of animals and humans, as well as ritual offerings, bundles of dried herbs tied with leather thongs, clay shards with incomprehensible symbols, scraps of coarse fabric, and a few tarnished copper coins. The surviving werewolves we had pursued, the two that had fled from the previous chamber, had huddled in dark, deep niches in the corners of this immense grotto, their red, glowing coal eyes malevolently gleaming from the gloom. They did not attack, but only growled softly, gutturally, crouched low to the ground, their bodies tense as if ready to spring, awaiting a command. There were more than just two. I counted at least 6 pairs of burning eyes. In front of the statue itself, almost touching its stone base, with its back to us, stood a lone, motionless figure, from head to foot shrouded in a dark, shapeless, mud and blood-stained robe with a deep hood that concealed its face. The figure was as still as a statue, part of this grim composition.
RSD, halt! Identify yourselves!
Captain Aguilar's voice, amplified by her helmet speaker, cut sharply, authoritatively, and unexpectedly loud through the echoing silence, reverberating repeatedly off the stone walls and vaults of the grotto. The robed figure slowly, with an ominous theatricality, began to turn towards us. The hood, concealing its face, slipped back and we saw him. It was an old man, desiccated like a mummy, with parchment-thin, deathly pale skin stretched tightly over prominent cheekbones and a sharp, hooked nose. Long, tangled, wispy white hair fell in unkempt strands to his shoulders. But his eyes, they were wide open, almost insane, bloodshot and burning with an internal, fanatical, inhuman fire. He didn't seem surprised or frightened by our appearance. He was annoyed, as if we had interrupted an important ritual. He didn't utter a word, only slowly swept his heavy, penetrating, assessing gaze over each of us. I felt a chill run down my spine again. There was nothing human in that gaze, only cold, ancient malice and a chilling emptiness.
"Who are you?"
Aguilar asked again, her hand resting on her pistol grip, and the barrel of her rifle aimed precisely at the center mass of the old man's figure. "What is happening here? Where are the other missing people?" The old man finally spoke, and his voice creaking, rattling, and utterly devoid of intonation, as if someone were scraping a rusty nail across glass, filled the cave, echoing off the walls and making the air vibrate. "You defilers," he hissed, every word oozing venom and hatred. "You dared to enter the sanctuary, the sacred home of the great wolf. You killed his loyal children, his chosen ones." "We came for the missing ranger and the other innocent people you bastards abducted," Aguilar replied firmly, enunciating every word. "And we will stop this nightmare you've unleashed here once and for all." The old man's face contorted into a gruesome grimace of fury. His thin, bloodless lips curled back, exposing yellowish, sparse teeth. "Nightmare? This is rebirth. This is the return of true power. This is purification. You blind fools, servants of false order, understand nothing. You cling to your pathetic, orderly, sterile little world, afraid to admit that true primal power lies in chaos, in instinct, in the bestial essence. The great wolf has slept for centuries, but he awakens. His call grows louder, and you will be the first to feel his sacred wrath. You will become a sacrifice upon his altar." "Glitch," Aguilar commanded quietly, almost inaudibly over our tactical comms. "Activate Protocol Typhon. Suppress any anomalous emissions." "Executing, Cap." "Glitch," replied just as quietly, his fingers already flying across the touch keyboard on his wrist computer. activating broadband white noise generator on thaumaturgical frequencies. But his energy signature, it's unstable, like an overheating nuclear reactor. And it's growing every second. He's doing something. He's accumulating energy. The old man, meanwhile, spread his bony bird-like hands wide, his gnarled fingers extending like claws. You will be cursed, every one of you. Your souls will wander eternally in these forests of darkness, torn apart by his loyal hounds. The great wolf demands blood. His voice began to change rapidly, becoming lower, coarser, losing human intonation and shifting into a guttural, primal growl. The old man's body trembled with a fine tremor. Then it began to contort and break at unnatural angles. I heard a disgusting, wet crunch of breaking bones, the sound of flesh and skin tearing from within. The robe stretched to its limit and ripped at the seams with a crack. "He's transforming!" I shouted, raising my rifle and preparing to open fire. "Cap orders! Fire to kill! Don't let him finish!" Aguilar's voice was like the crack of a whip. But before we could press the triggers of our rifles, the old man, transforming into something else, let out a deafening, inhuman howl. A howl filled with primal pain, furious rage, and a gruesome, twisted triumph. His back arched, limbs began to lengthen and thicken, visibly growing thick, bluish-black fur. His face elongated, turning into a bestial muzzle with powerful jaws, teeth extending and sharpening into deadly fangs. In just a few fleeting but seemingly eternal seconds, where the withered ancient old man had stood, now stood a monster. A werewolf, but not like those we had encountered before. This one was much larger, taller, more powerful, its muscles rippling under thick fur, and in its eyes, burning blood red, glowed not just animal instinct, but a cold, calculating, bone-chilling intelligence. He flung aside the remnants of his torn robe and straightened to his full, monstrous, nearly 8-foot height. The fur on his massive nape stood on end, like an enraged wolf's, and from his chest erupted a low, menacing growl that vibrated the floor beneath our feet. "It's him," Glitch whispered, his voice trembling despite the helmet filters. "It's the Alpha, what they call their great wolf." He was the embodiment of a primal nightmare. The werewolf old man, now a full-fledged alpha, let out another short, guttural roar. And this time the werewolves hiding in the shadows in the corners of the chamber responded with equally furious, multi-voiced howls. They slowly but inexorably began to crawl out of their hiding places, their bodies tense, claws scraping against the stone, surrounding us, cutting off our retreat. We were trapped in the very heart of their cursed lair, face to face with their terrifying leader and his hungry, enraged pack. The air in the cave grew even thicker, filled with the heavy, suffocating smell of blood, wet fur, ozone from our discharges, and primal, animalistic dread. My old grandfather's compass on my chest was no longer just vibrating. It was beating like a trapped bird, its needle spinning wildly, unable to find direction in this place where space itself was distorted by evil will. We were at the very epicenter of the storm, and this storm was about to unleash its full, inhuman, destructive fury upon us. Chances of survival were slim, but we were the Night Watch. We didn't retreat. We fought. To the end. "Disperse. Sector defense. Fire at will, short bursts, aim for the head and chest." Aguilar roared, her voice amplified by the tactical helmet and filtered for calm despite the surrounding chaos, cut through the escalating roars of the werewolves and echoed off the grotto walls. We instantly, like a well-oiled machine, formed a circular defense, back to back, our M4 SBR rifles spitting short, precise bursts of silver bullets. The first few werewolves from the pack, the smaller ones, who had lunged at us from the shadows in blind fury, fell within yards, struck down by our deadly silver, their death howls, full of pain and surprise, reverberating through the vast, echoing grotto. But the Alpha, the former cultist elder, was of an entirely different breed. He did not charge in a mindless, blind attack like his subordinates. He moved with chilling, inhuman calculation and the grace of a predator, circling us in a wide arc. His eyes, crimson as hot coals, carefully assessing each of us, searching for a weak link in our defense. He was not merely a beast intoxicated by bloodlust. He was a commander, an experienced tactician leading his army into battle. His intellect was obvious and almost more terrifying than his physical might.
"Cap, he's too smart. He's not charging head-on,"
I yelled, quickly changing an empty magazine while simultaneously tracking the movements of two more werewolves trying to flank us.
"He's waiting for his moment, studying us."
"I know, Hawk. Hold the line. Don't let him separate us. Use grenades." Aguilar's voice was calm, but steel resolution resonated within it. Without waiting for our first aimed shot at him, the Alpha let out a short, guttural, barking roar, a clear command, and the other werewolves, there were at least a dozen more, surged forward again from all sides simultaneously. This time their actions were more coordinated. They moved in groups of 2 or 3, trying to break our defense and distract our attention from their leader. We fired back, our rifles ceaseless for a second. Glitch, in addition to firing his modified AA-12 shotgun loaded with a drum magazine full of silver buckshot, hurled several M84 flashbangs and XM-1060 concentrated aconite grenades, creating temporary barriers of blinding light, deafening sound, and acrid, paralyzing smoke that made the creatures howl and recoil. Doc, Washington, taking up a position between me and Aguilar, not only fired her rifle with precise aim, but also without ceasing. Chanted phrases in purest Latin from ancient texts, lines from an exorcism ritual that made the werewolves instinctively recoil, and the air around us became cleaner and colder. The ancient words of power, passed down in her family for generations, possessed real, tangible might against these spawn of darkness. But the Alpha still did not join the general melee. He circled us like a shark around its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment came when our attention was maximally focused on repelling another furious attack from his pack. With incredible humanly invisible speed, he blurred into a black streak and lunged forward. His target was Doc, who was at that moment reloading her rifle. I saw it from the corner of my eye and only managed to shout, "Doc, behind you, look out!" But it was already too late. The Alpha's huge, fur-covered clawed paw, each claw as long as my finger, struck Serafina in the chest with monstrous force, throwing her 10 feet back like a rag doll, and she crashed with a dull, heavy thud against the uneven stone wall of the cave. Her tactical helmet saved her head from a direct impact with the stone, but it flew off and rolled away, and she slumped limply, remaining motionless against the wall, her arms unnaturally splayed. Serafina. Glitch roared, his voice cracking with rage and despair. But before he could do anything turn around or shoot, the Alpha was already turning towards him, its bloody maw bared in a gruesome, triumphant grin. "Glitch back, cover yourself!" Aguilar shouted, instantly assessing the situation, and let loose a long, aimed burst from her rifle directly into the Alpha's broad chest. The 300 blackout silver bullets struck him with tremendous force, tearing out clumps of black fur and leaving several deep smoking wounds from which dark, almost black blood oozed, but the monster merely roared with fury and pain, not even staggering. He was incredibly, supernaturally resilient and pain-tolerant. Silver caused him intense pain, but it couldn't stop him as quickly as his smaller kin. Standard silver rounds are just making him angry. He's too strong, I snarled, trying to keep his constantly moving, blood-red eyes in the crosshairs of my red dot sight. The Alpha brushed off our bullets like annoying flies and, with one powerful leap, was beside Aguilar. She managed to dodge aside at the last moment, and its enormous claws only scraped against her reinforced Guardian 4 body armor, leaving 4 deep, smoking gouges and kicking up a shower of sparks. The quality of the armor and the consecrated silver threads woven into it prevented a fatal blow.
Hawk, glitch now, Protocol St. George, our only hope, cover me.
Aguilar cried, dodging another furious swipe from the Alpha and simultaneously activating a device on her tactical forearm. St. George's Cross, or Protocol George, our special tool against particularly large, strong, and resilient Alpha-class creatures. 4 heavy, pointed darts of pure, consecrated silver, each weighing about 5 pounds, connected by thin but incredibly strong chains of silver and tungsten alloy, also consecrated. The darts were fired simultaneously from special pneumatic launchers integrated into our tactical gloves and forearms. The idea was to corner the target in the center and fire simultaneously, creating an energy cage of taut silver chains around it that not only physically constrained the monster but also generated a powerful field of negative, thaumaturgical energy, lethal to most supernatural beings. We had used it only a couple of times, and it was always risky, requiring perfect coordination and composure. This weapon was designed for situations where conventional methods were ineffective and required ideal conditions for deployment, open space, and precise teamwork.
Glitch, are you ready? Cover the right flank, I shouted, trying to keep the Alpha in my sights while simultaneously firing at 2 ordinary werewolves who were charging us again. Never been more ready, Hawk. Let's get this hairy bastard for Doc. Glitch was already aiming, his face pale but determined. He knew that if we missed or one of us faltered, it would be the end. On my command! Aguilar rolled sideways, skillfully avoiding another crushing blow from the Alpha's clawed paw, which easily pulverized a large stalagmite where she had just been standing. Now! We simultaneously, as if on command from an invisible conductor, pressed the triggers of our wrist launchers. 4 silver darts with a characteristic hiss of compressed air shot out of the launchers and plunged with tremendous force into the stone floor around the Alpha, forming an almost perfect square about 10 feet on a side. At that very instant, as the darts secured themselves in the stone, the silver chains connecting them burst into a bright, blinding bluish light, and a visible energy field, pulsating and sparking, appeared between them. The Alpha found itself at the center of this shining, deadly diagram. The monster roared, but this time its voice held not only blind fury, but genuine pain and fear. It tried to break free, lunging at one of the invisible walls of the energy cage, but the unseen barrier created by the cross flung it back into the center with force. The chain stretched taut, like strings on a giant harp, emitting an increasingly intense, almost unbearable to the eyes, glow. The fur on the Alpha's body began to smoke and char. It thrashed in agony, letting out agonizing shrieks, but it could no longer escape this silver trap. "Hold him! Don't let him weaken the field!" Aguilar shouted. She discarded her rifle and drew her ancestral sword from her back. A long, about 3.5 feet, double-edged blade of dully gleaming, almost black with age silver, covered with an intricate pattern of ancient runic symbols that now glowed with a faint, internal, pulsating light. For Doc, for Henderson, for all the innocents you've destroyed, spawn of darkness. With these words full of cold, restrained fury, Captain Aguilar, our rock, charged forward directly into the center of the silver storm. My compass on my chest at that moment flashed with a short but bright light, and I felt a wave of confidence and strength pass through me, helping me keep my aim steady on the thrashing Alpha. The Alpha, sensing the approach of a new, even more terrifying threat, let out a desperate, prolonged roar and made one last frantic attempt to break through the energetic bonds. But the St. George's Cross held it tight, draining its life force. Aguilar, moving with incredible speed and precision that would be impossible for an ordinary human, darted to the convulsing monster. She raised her ancient sword, and the silver blade, imbued with centuries of struggle against evil, cleaved the air with a whistle that made the air stand still. There was a disgusting, wet, squelching crunch, and the Alpha's enormous, black, smoking, fur-covered head, with its blood-red eyes still burning with insane rage, detached from its powerful body and fell with a dull, heavy thud onto the stone floor of the cave, rolling several feet away. The monster's headless torso convulsed for a few more seconds, gushing fountains of dark, almost tar-black, foul-smelling blood from its severed neck, and then went limp, collapsing in the center of the still-glowing cross. At that very instant, as the Alpha, their leader and source of power, died, all the other werewolves in the cave, those still desperately fighting or hiding in the shadows, awaiting the outcome of the duel, let out a piercing, multi-voiced howl full of unbearable torment and despair. Their bodies began to contort and writhe, as if simultaneously struck by an invisible, all-consuming fire. Before our eyes, their monstrous bestial forms began to melt, shrink, black fur retracted back under the skin. Claws shortened and disappeared. Muzzles lost their predatory outlines. After a few agonizing, gruesome moments, no longer werewolves but naked, dead human bodies lay on the cave floor. Men and women, young and old, their faces contorted by death throes and terror. These were the cult members, fully consumed by the bestial essence of their dark deity. And with the Alpha's death, their connection to him, which had given them strength and life, was severed, dragging their pathetic, twisted souls into the darkness. A deafening, almost absolute silence settled in the cave, broken only by our heavy, ragged breaths. The faint hiss as the silver chains of the St. George's Cross cooled and dimmed, and the distant monotonous drip of water somewhere deep within this cursed place. We had won. But the price of this victory, as always, was high, and the sight of dozens of dead, naked human bodies scattered around us wouldn't let us forget it for a second. This wasn't a victory to be proud of. It was just a job. A dirty, bloody, but necessary job for the Night Watch. The first to break the oppressive, palpable silence was Glitch. Tossing aside his now useless shotgun, he rushed to Doc, who still lay motionless against the wall. He fell to his knees beside her, his trembling fingers quickly but gently checking the pulse on her carotid artery, examining her pupils with his multi-tools built-in flashlight. I also ran over, my heart sinking into my empty stomach. Serafina lay unnaturally quiet and still. Her face, usually dark-skinned and vibrant, was pale, almost gray, like the limestone walls of this cursed cave. She's alive. Glitch exhaled with immense, genuine relief, his voice cracking.
Pulse is weak, thready, but it's there. Breathing is shallow. Severe concussion, compression fracture of 1 or 2 vertebrae in her cervical spine, and definitely several broken ribs. Her Argus tactical helmet and Guardian 4 body armor saved her life, absorbing the main force of the impact, but it was monstrous. The silver cross on her chest also took part of the impact energy and cracked. She'd be dead without it. He carefully unzipped the collar of her jumpsuit and showed me the massive silver cross Doc always wore. It indeed had a deep dent and several cracks, having stopped something invisible but very powerful. Glitch. Immediately, without losing a second, set to work, pulling out necessary supplies from his medical pouch, carefully applying a cervical collar, checking her airway, administering powerful painkillers, anti-shock medication, and a cardiac stimulant. His hands, usually flying with incredible speed and precision over touch keyboards and microchips, now moved with the confidence and professionalism of an experienced field paramedic. Each of us in the RSD underwent advanced tactical medicine training, but Glitch had always approached it with particular zeal. Captain Aguilar slowly, as if bearing an unbearable burden, approached the headless, still faintly smoking body of the Alpha. Her silver ancestral sword was plunged hilt deep into the stone floor beside her, its blade still faintly pulsating with an internal light, absorbing the remnants of dark energy. She breathed heavily, her face covered in sweat, blood, and dirt. Her eyes held immense fatigue mixed with grim, absent satisfaction. Secure the perimeter. Her voice was hoarse and quiet, but it still carried undeniable authority. Thoroughly. Make sure there are no more surprises left here, neither living nor dead capable of coming back to life. Then, examine the bodies of these cultists. We need to gather all possible data, samples, anything that will help us understand what we've faced, and prepare for the arrival of the Omega cleanup team. They're on their way. Glitch and I, after he finished administering first aid to Doc and hooked her up to a portable vital signs monitor, methodically, step by step, swept the entire vast grotto and its adjacent smaller branches and niches. There were no more living threats, only cold, rapidly stiffening dead bodies of cultists, scattered throughout the chamber in the most unnatural poses. Some of them, judging by the remnants of clothing and some personal belongings, looked like ordinary, unremarkable civilians, clerks, housewives, students. Others like vagrants, hermits, or marginalized individuals long disconnected from society. What compelled them all to follow this dark, bloody path, to worship ancient, primal evil, and offer human sacrifices in these god-forsaken cursed caves? What promises or threats made them abandon their humanity? We would never know the answers to these questions. I approached the giant stone statue of the Great Wolf. Now, upon closer, calmer inspection, it seemed even more sinister and ancient. Its empty, weathered eye sockets had absorbed all the darkness and pain of this cursed place. At its base, amidst blackened animal bones, human skulls, and scattered ritual objects, I noticed a small, heavily worn, frayed at the edges leather journal. Carefully, so as not to damage the fragile pages, I picked it up. The pages were covered in uneven, almost manic, erratic handwriting, the ink blurred in places from moisture. These were, without a doubt, the writings of the old man, the former leader of this grim cult, the very one who had transformed into the Alpha. Incoherent, feverish lines about the awakening of an ancient power hidden within the earth, about unity with nature through blood, pain, and primal rage,
about the coming kingdom of the beast that would cleanse the world of the defilement of civilization. The ravings of a madman. I handed the journal to Captain Aguilar. She silently, without a word, took it, not even looking at the cover, and placed it in a special sealed artifact container. It would become another exhibit in our secret archives deep underground. Another grim fragment of knowledge about the multifaceted darkness we relentlessly fought. A couple of hours later, as the first timid rays of the morning sun finally found their way through narrow cracks in the grotto's ceiling, illuminating this scene of death and destruction with an ethereal, unreal light, the Omega cleanup team arrived. These individuals in sterile white protective suits and full-face respirators, looking more like astronauts than operatives, worked quickly, precisely, and utterly dispassionately. They methodically collected biological samples, photographed every detail, and packed the cultists' bodies into special black sealed bags. Their main task was to erase all traces of our presence here, and the very existence of this cult and its monstrous deity. The official legend for local authorities and the media would be simple, prosaic, and completely false. A sudden collapse of an old, previously unknown karst cave system. The tragic death of a group of unregistered extreme tourists or members of some fringe religious sect who ventured too far in search of solitude or thrills. The truth, as always, would remain buried here, along with the bones, the curses, and our own nightmares. The local rangers and Sheriff Brody, whom our people kept at the base under the pretext of ensuring their safety until the very end of the operation, would never learn what truly happened deep within Blackwater Ridge, for their own good. Local media received strictly filtered reports, and federal agents handled the cleanup of all evidence. It had always been this way. Doc. Washington was conscious but very weak and disoriented. She was carefully loaded onto a lightweight tactical stretcher, and along with us, tired, dirty, and drained, lifted aboard our trusty Nighthawk, which was already waiting for us in a hidden, camouflaged clearing a few miles from the entrance to the cursed cave. The helicopter's powerful rotors stirred up a cloud of fallen leaves, pine needles, and dust, and we finally soared into the morning sky, leaving the grim, ominous Shoshone forest below. I looked out the window at the rapidly receding mountains and forests. From above, bathed in the bright morning sun, this land seemed incredibly peaceful, beautiful, and serene. It was hard to believe that only a few hours ago there, in its dark, damp depths, a real, bloody hell had unfolded. The price of preserving this fragile semblance of peace and tranquility, as always, was high. Mike Henderson, the unfortunate tourists in the cocoons, dozens of crazed cultists, and our nearly lost Doc. The list of casualties in this undeclared war was constantly growing. Captain Aguilar sat across from me, her face impassive like a mask, but in her eyes, I saw hidden pain and immense fatigue. She caught my gaze. "We are that thin black line, Hawk," she said quietly, almost inaudibly, her voice barely cutting through the rising roar of the engines. "Between this world, bathed in sunlight full of unsuspecting happy people, and that primal, eternal darkness that always lurks around the corner, always waiting for its hour, always trying to break out. Someone has to hold that line. Someone has to stand guard, even if it means paying for it with our blood, our souls, our sleep." I nodded silently, unable to find the right words. She was right. This was our job, our duty, our curse, and our sole purpose. We are the Night Watch, and as long as darkness exists in this world, our work will never end. My old grandfather's compass on my chest was still warm from the ordeal, but its frantic vibration had finally ceased. The meteor iron needle, true as ever, pointed confidently north again. For a while. Until the next call. Until the next Blackwood Protocol. Until the next battle in the shadows.